This review was filmed during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the labor of the writers and actors currently on strike, the works being covered here wouldn't exist. I fully support the WGA and SAG-AFTRA in their fight for fair treatment and compensation against a system that continually denies them such. While a full boycott has not been called for, SAG-AFTRA has asked that everyone who does media about film and TV refrain from promoting struck content during this time. From what I can tell based on guidelines they have released, independent reviews do not constitute promotion of a work, but critical assessment of said work of art. Any praise that I give to these works during this video should be seen as praise purely for the artists, writers, and actors who created it. If anything, the praise is emphasizing that the writers, actors, and other artists deserve more compensation because they are who make these works possible. Additionally, this video was not made using any studio-provided screeners or materials. Do not support any studios during the strike. So, the villain in this Star Wars show is building a bigger version of a thing that we've seen in other Star Wars things before. What a brand new and radical plan for a Star Wars villain. Hello, interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, because I am here to review the latest episode of Star Wars Ahsoka, this time episode 3. I think it's just called part 3. It didn't really say on the Disney Plus app, so if there is an actual title, I don't know it as of the time of this recording, so we're just going to call it part 3. And as per usual, I will stay spoiler-free for the most part up front, but then we'll get pretty quickly into spoilers. But starting off here, I will say, my sarcasm at the top aside, I actually really enjoyed this episode, but I, for the most part, don't think that this episode is going to really change anyone's opinion that they had about this show based on what we saw on the last 2 episodes. I've watched over the past week or so a lot of reactions and reviews come out about Ahsoka, some being more positive, some being more negative, but the same sort of issues coalescing around the entire series, namely around, I think the biggest criticism being its pacing and the fact that it so heavily relies on you knowing a lot of Star Wars Rebels to really invest into this story and its characters and what it's trying to do with its narrative. And I had really hoped that once we got past the first 2 episodes of the season, which really felt like it was set up and also just sort of getting people who had not seen Star Wars Rebels sort of caught up on, these characters, where we are in the world, what the main sort of thrust with the storyline with Ezra is, and getting to meet Sabine and Ahsoka and their dynamic and all of that jazz. And I'd really hoped that this episode would kind of be the one to sort of shoot it into high gear and really get it going once all that groundwork had been laid. But sadly, I don't really feel like that this episode has done that. That being all said, though, I actually still liked part 1 and part 2, and part 3 kind of continues the stuff that I really enjoyed. Namely, the characterization of Sabine and Ahsoka is continued here. David Tennant being absolutely amazing. Just every single second he's on screen as Hu Yang, I am just here for it. And the villains remain intriguing, as well as some hints at larger stuff going on with this era of Star Wars and the New Republic and all of that. So all of the stuff that I liked from part 1 and part 2 is still here, but it doesn't really do anything that pushes the story forward in a really fast-paced way, nor is I think it going to really change anyone's minds based on what they saw after part 1 and part 2. But to get into some of the specifics, let's get into some of the spoiler-filled stuff so I can be able to talk about all of that. So if you have not seen the episode yet, hyper jump out of here because we're going to get into it. So, like I said, I liked this episode a lot because of its focus on Ahsoka and Sabine, and I'm really liking this episode took the time to build up their dynamic as master and apprentice, because we haven't really gotten to see that on screen. That was sort of was skipped over in the area between Rebels and now, and so getting a chance to see what they're like as, this dynamic, I thought really worked, and getting to see the training with Ahsoka trying to be patient with Sabine, but still they're not really fully clicking, and Sabine being frustrated. And what I really liked in terms of this characterization for me was that it didn't fall into tropes or sort of cartoonish, over-the-top dynamics that we could have gone into. It would have been very easy to just see Sabine, be this rebellious person to Ahsoka. It's ugh, how frustrating. Why don't you just teach me more now? It just could have been that very over-the-top thing that I've seen a billion times elsewhere. But you really get the sense that, while Sabine is frustrated and she and Ahsoka are not entirely clicking, they do have a deep respect for each other and a care for each other. And that sort of depth to the relationship, I thought, added a new flavor to this that really, I think, worked for me. But you do see that they aren't entirely clicking right right up front. Most evident when like we get into the firefight when they enter the system, that Morgan and the rest of the fallen Jedi characters slash the Inquisitor guy that's there, Martok or Marok I guess is his name, that they have to like relearn how to work together, and they do that through flying the ship. And I thought that was a very effective action sequence for that. And I also just love Hu Yang throughout all of it, just sort of giving like what it's true. Like she's not the best at this. She doesn't have a force sensitivity, and sort of just giving his judgment and sort of casting his eye on them in a way that like I think bonded them together. I will also say I did really enjoy the firefight sequence. I think most people have generally agreed that the action sequences in Ahsoka have been really, really solid, and I think this one followed up on that. It's by no means, knocking it out of the park, the best fight sequence that I've ever seen, but it was really solid and did a good job of characterizing Ahsoka and Sabine having to learn to work together again, and them finally eventually clicking in a way that didn't fall too much into tropes, but just showed that they were just a hair off of each other and just had to realign. That being said, I will say the one part that got a little bit too far for me was when Ahsoka went on the wing with the lightsabers. While that's a really cool visual and idea, in execution it comes across as a little bit too cartoonish for me, because I do wonder why the people shooting at Ahsoka, namely the other, fallen Jedi, would even ever get close enough for them to be hit by Ahsoka. Like, the guy who just flew right by Ahsoka and she cut him apart, that was just dumb on his part. You just shoot from a distance and then fly away. They're not moving. It felt a little bit cartoonish in terms of execution, even though I get why you would want to do that, because it is a really cool visual, but sadly a bit over the top for me. I also like the concept that this episode was getting at with Sabine of the democratizing of the Force, kind of building upon the idea that we saw in The Last Jedi, that more people can use the Force than we initially ever thought in Star Wars, that it's not just these heroes, these special people who have it, but that anyone can use it. Just some may have a natural propensity for it than others, but everyone should be able to tap into it. And I'm really excited to see Sabine's probable arc throughout the series of being able to use the Force, even though she wasn't naturally Force sensitive like someone like Luke or Anakin. And I also really loved the conversation that Hu Yang has with Ahsoka being like, yeah, she is an atypical Jedi. She wouldn't have been good enough. And Ahsoka sort of saying the same things like, well, I don't need her to be, a Jedi. I need her to be herself. And I got, putting a queer reading on that, it's like, yeah, queer people, like, it's like, I don't need her to be, like, fit this, like, ancient order that's lasted for years and eventually failed because it was built up on its own bullshit. I just need her to be herself, and that's what I want her to be. I'm trying to enable her to do that. Because Ahsoka knows the bullshit that the Jedi have gone through if you watch Clone Wars. Not to say that they are queer, but this queer lens that you could apply to these characters in terms of their relationships to, larger systems like the Jedi and even the New Republic. So all of that really worked for me. What worked a little bit less for me was the stuff with the New Republic and Hera. Well, it was cool to see Mon Mothma, and I love that Mon Mothma has kind of become like weirdly the Rosario Dawson of the Star Wars universe, because I believe Rosario Dawson was the character that was like in all of the Marvel MCU TV shows on Netflix. So she's like weirdly become that for this show, for the Star Wars universe, which is fun to see because I do find Mon Mothma to be an interesting character, most especially on Andor. And so it was cool to see her there, but the stuff with the New Republic felt very rudimentary, like prequel level politics, and maybe even more rudimentary than that, because it's just like, yeah, the New Republic sucks and everything's getting caught up in a committee. Like, that felt very prequel vibes, and it felt like very on the nose, and I could see it coming a mile away. And we spend this whole time like sort of building up this like Hera trying to get the the New Republic to do something, and you just know it's not going to go anywhere. And so this back and forth that you're just like, I wish we got a little bit more depth with seeing what the New Republic's going to be if you're going to spend that much time with it. Which then I think gets to the larger aspect that I think most people have been criticizing and certainly won't go away with this episode, and that is pacing. I am here for the slower pace. I'm actually on record in my last review that I actually didn't mind the slower pacing the first two episodes, but that sort of was coming with the understanding that this is like easing people into like this corner of the Star Wars universe. And now getting into episode 3, I'm really starting to feel the pacing problem that other people were feeling earlier, because like I would really hope by the end of this episode we would already be like off getting into the other part of the galaxy. Like, we already knew that this is what they were building this big hyperspace ring, even if we didn't know that exactly. Like, we knew that they were going to try and get outside of the galaxy, and so I was hoping that would be like part of this episode instead of like the entirety of this episode, because even at the end of this, they're being hunted in the forest, and it feels like next episode is going to be them being hunted in the forest by Ray Stevenson's character, and then maybe at the end of that episode we'll have them going off to the other galaxy to get Thrawn. I'm like, I really kind of even wanted to see Thrawn by the end of this episode, or, you know, early in the next one, and to know that we're probably going to spend most of next episode still, you know, taking time to get there is frustrating, to say the least. So, you know, I'd hope the slower pace was just for the first few episodes, but it seems like it might be indicative of the entire series, which, you know, feels like it's stretching out a story a little bit too long. Like The Mandalorian, for example, had a weird problem where they added too much plot and just kept doing things that we didn't care what was going on. It's like, okay, I don't care what's happening up here. Whereas Mandalorian, I feel like, might have the Obi-Wan Kenobi show problem, which is that it's not a lot of story spread out to get along too many hours. And so I really hope that that's not going to be the case and it picks up, but certainly these first two episodes, and especially this episode, don't really give me any sense of, you know, hope in that. So we'll ultimately see where it's going to go with that. And also, another criticism is that this episode still relies heavily on people having to learn stuff from Rebels, like the Purgles that we get to see. Well, I thought seeing the Purgles was really cool, and I thought they tied in well to the story, are not something that someone who has not seen Rebels would even really care about. They're one little small cameo in The Mandalorian Season 3 aside. And so to put this like big emotional weight on the Purgles at the end of this episode without really contextualizing them beforehand, I think didn't do this episode any favors for people who hadn't seen Rebels. For people who have seen Rebels, though, like me, I was like, oh my god, it's the Purgles, very exciting. So it's just this show kind of still working on two different wavelengths that I think push out people who have not seen Rebels yet. Other things that I thought were interesting throughout this episode, I mean, it was nice to sort of see Hera and Kanan's kid. I was like surprised that he just has green hair, like no Twi'lek features at all. It was also, you know, we got a little bit more of the dynamic between the, you know, fallen Jedi with Marok, sort of being the most subservient one, it seems. You know, I know there's a bunch of like theorizing going on about Marok. You know, if I had to put money down, I would say it's probably Ezra. Like the twist is like a brainwashed Ezra is who that character is. That's the only one that seems to make sense for me given the setup of the show, because it feels like there's been other theories going on connecting to like Clone Wars and Rebels, and not that Dave Filoni isn't above like bringing in those characters, but it feels very weirdly superfluous in this show. And not that I want it to be Ezra, it would feel weird if it was Ezra, but if there is going to be like a secret identity reveal, it feels like Ezra would be the one that makes the most sense. And it also feels weird to have like this third character beyond the two like fallen Jedi characters that we see, and not like have something kind of special to do with him, because otherwise he feels even more superfluous. So yeah, I feel like there's going to be some secret reveal. I hope not, but it feels like there's going to be, and if that there is, it's probably going to be Ezra, which again, I hope not, but we shall see. So those are all of, I think, my quick thoughts on this episode. What did you think of this episode of Star Wars Ahsoka? I'd love to hear all your thoughts down below. Do you think it's Ezra? Do you think he's someone else? But I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. And beyond all that, my friends, live long and prosper.